For centuries, warriors with golden hair and piercing blue eyes stormed across Europe, leaving behind a legacy that still echoes in our DNA today. From the misty forests of Scandinavia to the heart of the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes reshaped history, but their true origins remain shrouded in mystery. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why do millions today still carry the genetic imprint of these ancient warriors? The story of the Germanic people begins over 2,500 years ago, deep in the dense woodlands of northern Europe. Unlike the grand civilizations of Rome and Greece, these tribes left no great cities or written records. Instead, their history was etched into the battlefield and carried in the songs of their poets. The first evidence of their existence traces back to the Jastorf culture, a prehistoric society that thrived along the Elbe River in what is now northern Germany and Denmark. Over time, these early Germanic tribes expanded, stretching their influence across the cold Baltic shores and deep into Central Europe. But unlike their neighbors, they remained fiercely independent, resisting foreign rule and maintaining a way of life built on warrior honor and tribal loyalty. The first real glimpse of the Germanic people comes from Roman writers. Julius Caesar, encountering them for the first time, described them as taller, stronger, and more ferocious than the Celts. But it was the historian Tacitus who gave us one of the most detailed accounts, painting them as warlike, disciplined, and deeply connected to their gods. Unlike the Romans, who built their empire on centralized rule, the Germanic tribes operated under a system of warrior chieftains, where strength and loyalty determined leadership, not birthright. It was this decentralized power that made them difficult to conquer, because there was no single kingdom to overthrow. As the centuries passed, the Germanic people moved in waves, not just as warriors, but as settlers, explorers, and traders. Climate changes and population pressures pushed them west into Gaul, south into Italy, and even as far as North Africa. Some of the most famous tribes, the Goths, Vandals, Saxons, and Lombards, would come to shape the very foundations of Europe. Their influence didn't just end with migration. Their encounters with Rome would forever change the empire itself. The Germanic way of war, their fierce independence, and their resistance to centralized control all played a role in the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire. But what truly sets the Germanic people apart isn't just their military prowess or cultural influence. It's what lies within their DNA. Unlike many ancient civilizations that faded into history, the genetic legacy of the Germanic tribes remains deeply woven into modern Europe. And with every new discovery, we learn more about how these ancient warriors continue to shape who we are today. The DNA of the Germanic people is unlike any other in Europe. For centuries, their genetic markers have remained remarkably distinct, carrying clues about their mysterious origins, their warrior culture, and their influence on modern populations. But what makes their DNA so unique? And how did it manage to survive, despite waves of invasions, migrations, and conquests? To understand this, we need to go back over 2,000 years, when the Germanic tribes lived in isolated, forested regions of northern Europe. Unlike the Romans, who mixed extensively with conquered peoples, Germanic tribes were more genetically homogeneous, maintaining strong ancestral lineages. This was partly due to their clan-based society, where marriages often occurred within the same tribal groups, preserving their distinct genetic identity. Over time, this created a population with specific genetic traits, such as a higher frequency of light hair, blue or green eyes, and taller statures, traits that continue to be associated with many Northern and Central Europeans today. One of the biggest clues about Germanic DNA comes from their haplogroups, the genetic markers passed down from generation to generation. A dominant marker among Germanic people is R1bu106, often called the Germanic haplogroup. This genetic signature is found at high frequencies in Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Scandinavia, but is also present in Britain, brought there by the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes during the early medieval period. Another major marker, I1, is deeply tied to the early Germanic and Norse populations, tracing back to ancient hunter-gatherers of northern Europe. These haplogroups, along with specific mutations related to skin tone, eye color, and metabolism, help explain why Germanic ancestry still carries such a distinct genetic footprint. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Germanic DNA is how it resisted dilution over centuries. Even as they conquered or integrated with other civilizations, their core genetic traits remained. The Vikings, for example, who were partly descended from early Germanic tribes, spread their genes across Europe, from Ireland to Russia, yet many of their distinct markers persist today. Similarly, despite the Frankish kingdom absorbing large Romanized populations, modern DNA studies show that Frankish elites largely retained their Germanic ancestry. Recent genetic research has also revealed unexpected connections. The Goths and Vandals, who moved south into Italy and Spain, left behind a genetic trail that can still be detected in parts of Sicily and Iberia. Meanwhile, studies of ancient burials in Scandinavia and Germany show a surprising genetic continuity between early Germanic people and their modern descendants, suggesting that, despite massive historical changes, their bloodlines remain strong. Today, millions of people across Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Britain, and even parts of Eastern Europe carry the genetic legacy of the Germanic tribes. And as modern DNA science continues to advance, we're uncovering even more secrets about how these ancient people shaped the genetic map of Europe. The origins of the Germanic people are deeply rooted in prehistory, but their genetic story begins thousands of years before they were ever mentioned by Roman historians. To understand where they came from, we have to go back to the last ice age, when small bands of hunter-gatherers roamed northern Europe. As the glacier receded, these early people settled across the lands that would later become Scandinavia, Germany, and the Low Countries. But something unique happened in this region, something that would shape the DNA of the Germanic people forever. Unlike the Mediterranean civilizations, which absorbed a constant flow of new settlers from Africa and the Middle East, the ancestors of the Germanic tribes evolved in relative genetic isolation. This isolation played a crucial role in shaping their distinct genetic profile. Archaeological evidence suggests that as early as 3000 BCE, a new wave of migrants from the east, the corded ware culture, brought Indo-European languages and advanced metalworking to northern Europe. These early Indo-Europeans mixed with local populations, forming the genetic foundation of the Germanic people. By 500 BCE, these groups had become distinctly Germanic, with their own language and social structures. They lived in small, warlike tribes, often on the move, which limited intermarriage with outsiders and further preserved their genetic uniqueness. Unlike the Celts to their west or the Slavs to their east, they were never fully absorbed by larger empires, allowing their DNA to remain largely undiluted compared to many other European groups. Roman historians like Tacitus and Caesar were among the first to document the Germanic people, describing them as fierce warriors, taller than the Romans, with lighter hair and piercing eyes. But these physical traits weren't just legend. Modern genetic studies confirm that the Germanic people had a higher prevalence of the genes responsible for lighter hair and eye color, traits that had already been present in the region for thousands of years due to natural selection in low-light environments. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of their genetic origins is their haplogroups, the ancient markers that trace deep ancestral lineages. The Germanic people are strongly associated with haplogroup R1bu106, which is found at its highest frequencies in Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark. This marker is believed to have arrived with the early Indo-Europeans and later spread across Europe during the migration period. Another key haplogroup, I1, is even older, dating back to the original hunter-gatherers of northern Europe. This haplogroup is most commonly found in Scandinavia, northern Germany, and parts of the British Isles, further proving the deep-rooted connection between early Germanic people and modern populations in these regions. As Germanic tribes expanded, their genetic markers spread, but the core traits remained remarkably stable. Even after migrating into Roman territories, intermixing with other European groups, and establishing kingdoms across the continent, their distinct DNA signature remained strong. Today, millions of people in northern and central Europe carry the genetic legacy of these ancient tribes, proving that the bloodlines of the Germanic people are still very much alive. The genetic uniqueness of the Germanic people isn't just about their origins. It's also about how their DNA evolved in response to their harsh environment and warrior culture. Northern Europe, with its long, dark winters and cold climate, shaped the physical and mental traits of these ancient tribes in ways that still influence their descendants today. One of the most fascinating aspects of Germanic DNA is its adaptation to low-light conditions. Studies show that populations in northern Europe developed higher rates of genes associated with lighter skin, hair, and eyes, an evolutionary response to the region's limited sunlight. These traits allowed for better vitamin D absorption, which was crucial for survival in areas where sunlight was scarce for much of the year. This explains why the highest concentration of blue eyes and blonde hair is still found in regions historically inhabited by Germanic tribes, like Scandinavia and northern Germany. But it wasn't just the environment that shaped their DNA. It was also their way of life. Unlike the more urbanized Mediterranean civilizations, the Germanic people lived in small, close-knit warrior societies that placed extreme value on strength, endurance, and loyalty. Over centuries, this selective pressure favored genes linked to high physical stamina, strong immune systems, and even increased aggression in battle. Some scientists believe that certain warrior traits, such as higher levels of dopamine and testosterone, were passed down through generations, influencing everything from their military success against Rome to their later Viking raids. Perhaps the most intriguing genetic legacy of the Germanic people lies in their mental resilience. Research suggests that Northern Europeans have a higher prevalence of genes associated with long-term planning, self-discipline, and risk-taking behavior, traits that were essential for survival in an unpredictable, often brutal environment. These psychological traits didn't just shape the early Germanic tribes, they continue to define the cultural mindset of modern Germanic-descended nations today. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the genetic blueprint of the Germanic people remained largely intact. When the Vikings set sail for new lands, they carried their unique DNA with them, influencing the genetic makeup of populations across Britain, Iceland, and parts of France. Today, modern genetic studies confirm that Germanic ancestry is still highly distinct, with unique clusters of DNA found predominantly in Northern and Central Europe. So, what does this all mean? The genetic uniqueness of the Germanic people isn't just about the past, it's a living legacy. From their ancient warrior culture to the very way their bodies adapted to the environment, their DNA continues to shape the identities of millions of people across Europe and beyond. The Germanic tribes were never a single unified group, yet their DNA remained remarkably distinct from neighboring civilizations. The answer lies in their ancestral continuity and selective mixing, or, more accurately, their resistance to foreign genetic influence. Unlike the Romans, who absorbed vast numbers of people into their empire, the Germanic tribes maintained a strong tribal identity that limited outside integration. Their kin-based warrior culture meant that marriages and alliances were primarily kept within their own people, ensuring that their genetic makeup remained largely unchanged for centuries. Even during the migration period, when Germanic groups moved across Europe, they didn't assimilate into the populations they conquered as much as other migrating peoples did. Instead, they imposed their rule while preserving their own lineage. One of the biggest factors in their genetic stability was their geographic isolation. Many Germanic tribes settled in regions that were naturally protected by forests, mountains, and rivers, barriers that discouraged large-scale mixing with other groups. This isolation allowed their distinctive genetic traits, such as lighter pigmentation, increased height, and specific immune system adaptations, to be preserved over time. But what's even more fascinating is how their genetics have remained traceable even after centuries of migration and conquest. Modern DNA studies reveal clear genetic clusters in regions historically occupied by Germanic peoples, from Scandinavia to the British Isles and even as far as North America, where Germanic-descended populations carried their lineage. Another factor that contributed to their distinct DNA was their high mobility combined with selective breeding. The Germanic tribes, particularly the Vikings and other Norse groups, didn't just stay in one place. They spread across Europe, intermixing in some regions while maintaining genetic homogeneity in others. This created pockets of Germanic ancestry that can still be detected today, even in areas where they no longer dominate. Even as they conquered and assimilated into medieval European kingdoms, Germanic DNA remained a powerful genetic force, shaping the characteristics of many modern European populations. Whether through their isolation, selective breeding, or warrior-driven migration, the genetic legacy of the Germanic people remains one of the most distinct and traceable in human history. The Germanic tribes didn't just leave their mark on history through conquests and migrations. Their DNA continues to influence modern populations in ways many people don't even realize. Genetic studies show that large segments of Northern and Western Europeans, as well as people of Anglo-Saxon descent in North America, still carry clear traces of Germanic ancestry. But what exactly does this mean on a biological level? One of the most defining genetic traits of Germanic people is their higher frequency of lighter hair, skin, and eye color. This is not a coincidence. It's linked to adaptations for survival in the colder, darker climates of Northern Europe. The genes responsible for blonde hair and blue eyes, for example, are more commonly found in areas historically inhabited by Germanic tribes, such as Scandinavia and parts of Germany. Scientists believe that these traits may have provided an advantage in vitamin D absorption during long winters with limited sunlight. Another key genetic factor is height and body composition. Ancient Roman records frequently described Germanic warriors as being taller and more physically robust than their Mediterranean counterparts. Modern genetics confirms that the Germanic-descended populations of Scandinavia and the Netherlands have some of the tallest average heights in the world. This genetic trait likely developed as a result of natural selection, favoring individuals who were more resilient in physically demanding environments. But Germanic DNA influences more than just appearance. Certain immune system adaptations found in Germanic-descended populations suggest that their ancestors developed resistance to diseases common in their environment. Some studies even link these adaptations to a lower susceptibility to specific infections, while also correlating with a slightly higher prevalence of autoimmune conditions, a trade-off for having a strong immune response. Beyond genetics, the cultural impact of Germanic ancestry is deeply embedded in many modern societies. The English language, for instance, has strong Germanic roots, and many Germanic-derived words still dominate modern vocabulary. Even certain social structures and legal traditions, such as the emphasis on personal freedoms and local governance, can be traced back to Germanic tribal customs. Perhaps the most intriguing part is how these genetic markers have persisted despite centuries of migration, intermarriage, and cultural shifts. Even in places where Germanic tribes once ruled but later assimilated, such as England, northern France, and parts of Eastern Europe, DNA evidence still reveals their enduring presence. The fact that we can still identify these genetic signatures today speaks to the powerful and lasting impact of the Germanic peoples. The legacy of the Germanic tribes isn't just written in history books, it's inscribed in the DNA of millions of people today. But how much of their genetic influence still exists, and what does it tell us about their long-term impact? Modern genetic studies show that the DNA of Germanic tribes has left a significant imprint on Northern and Western Europe. In regions once dominated by these tribes, such as Scandinavia, Germany, the Netherlands, and even the British Isles, distinct genetic markers have been passed down for centuries. These markers are linked to traits such as height, lighter pigmentation, and immune system adaptations, all of which have helped shape the genetic identity of modern populations. One of the most fascinating aspects of Germanic DNA is how it spread and evolved over time. During the migration period, Germanic tribes moved south into the collapsing Roman Empire, intermingling with local populations. As a result, their genetic legacy is still detectable not just in Germany and Scandinavia, but also in France, Spain, and even parts of Italy. However, while Germanic ancestry is still present in these regions, it often exists as a subtle influence rather than a dominant genetic signature. In contrast, countries with strong Anglo-Saxon or Norse heritage, such as England, Scotland, and parts of Ireland, show a much higher genetic continuity with Germanic tribes. Studies on Y-DNA haplogroups, which trace paternal lineage, reveal that a significant percentage of modern British men carry genetic markers that match those of the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings. This confirms that the migration and settlement of Germanic tribes were not just cultural takeovers, but also deep-rooted genetic shifts. But what about the modern world? Advances in genetic testing have allowed millions of people to trace their ancestry back to Germanic origins. Companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA frequently identify Germanic and Scandinavian ancestry in people from the United States, Canada, and Australia, due to large-scale Germanic migration over the past few centuries. This shows that the genetic legacy of these ancient tribes has not only survived, but has expanded across the globe. Despite centuries of change, intermarriage, and cultural assimilation, the DNA of the Germanic peoples remains a powerful link to the past. Their genes continue to shape modern populations, influencing not just physical traits, but also health, resistance to diseases, and even cognitive patterns. The fact that we can still trace these genetic footprints today is a testament to the lasting impact of the Germanic peoples, one that will likely continue to be studied for generations to come.